long ago, I got to know Richard. I attended school with his girlfriend, and often we would hang out at a local club after school. I was 17 years old at the time, and he was 18. He and his girlfriend moved in together and later had a son. Years later, I ran into him by chance at a store, and from that point on, we started our contact again. He began texting me more frequently, and we became best friends. Secretly, I had a crush on him because he had transformed from a skinny teenager into a handsome, muscular man. Richard then confided in me that he had been separated from his girlfriend for many years and was now in a relationship with another woman. He mentioned that she was under the care of a gynecologist and that they were on the verge of getting married. I didn't hear from him for a while during that time. Meanwhile, my own relationship was doing bad, and I didn't feel like contacting friends. A year later, I saw Richard again at the store, and I immediately sensed that something was wrong. I was 35 at the time, and he was 36. I asked him if everything was okay, and he told me that his wife had passed away. She was 3 months pregnant. He invited me to his house to talk further, and I agreed to go with him. When I entered his house, I could already feel that something was wrong in that house. I felt like I was being watched, but he and I were the only ones in the house. I asked him if we could sit on the terrace and have a conversation about what was going on with him. What Richard told me next sent shivers down my spine. He said that his wife, I'll call her Stephanie, suddenly became very sick, and she had been under the care of a gynecologist for a long time, but they never found anything wrong. Her condition kept getting worse, and Richard eventually took her to a spiritual healer. The voodoo doctor discovered that Stephanie had been sacrificed by her own family. Her family did it for wealth and beauty. He explained that all the women in Stephanie's family were beautiful, and most of them were wealthy. They either married rich men or became successful entrepreneurs. He told me that at certain intervals, someone had to be sacrificed. Unfortunately, it was now Stephanie's turn. He said he gave her a proper funeral, but he couldn't find peace after everything that he had heard from the voodoo doctor. Dear people, in the meantime, while I was talking to Richard, he would go to Stephanie's grave almost every night to sleep there. When he told me that I wanted to run away from there, it frightened me. I asked him if he was going crazy, and he said, "No, Linda, I love her, and I miss her terribly." He told me that he used to feel a bit happier when he saw her, and if she didn't come, he would go to the cemetery to eat or sleep. So, I left Richard's house as quickly as I could. I could tell he wasn't well. I contacted his sister, and I asked her to keep an eye on her brother. Thankfully, she did, and she and her father made efforts to help him. I understand that he had to stay somewhere in his hometown for a week. During that week, they performed cultural rituals and cleansed him. Richard texted me again after that and asked if his sister and I could come to his house. He wanted to finally clear everything related to his late wife. I hesitated at first, but when his sister told me that one of her cousins would also help, I agreed to go. That house felt different now. I didn't feel like I was being watched anymore. On the contrary, I felt a kind of peace and contentment. Richard was going to move out of there, so we had to clean up everything. While I was there, 2 cousins were also present, so everything was going smoothly. However, Richard called me to help with the cabinet. He said it belonged to Stephanie, and I should just put everything from it saying that Stephanie had beautiful clothes, so she would occasionally say, "Linda, look at this beautiful skirt or blouse." Meanwhile, I was calmly dealing with the books. I was in the middle of putting several thick books into a box when everything slipped from my hands. Some photos and a letter fell out. I picked up the photos and saw a stunning young woman, completely naked. She posed very seductively for the camera. I was naturally shocked, and at that very moment, Richard walked in. He immediately realized something was wrong and took the photo from my hand. He said, "This is Stephanie." He also said he had never seen that photo before. I told him there was also a letter and handed it to him. He read it and started smiling. He said, "Well, so it was all this time." I didn't understand him at first, but later I learned from his sister that it was a love letter written by Stephanie to her lover. It was a letter that was supposed to be delivered, but due to her illness, she had never had the chance to do so. Richard asked his sister and me if we could go outside because he wanted to be alone for a moment. Later, he came out and told us that he had found more photos in those books. He asked his sister and me to quickly clean up the items because he didn't want to see anything more. He said he was going to drive away for a bit because he wasn't feeling well. His sister and I went back inside to continue cleaning up. We saw that he had thrown the photos on the floor. They were intimate photos of Stephanie and her lover. His sister was shocked when she saw who Stephanie's lover was. It turned out to be Stephanie's so-called cousin. His sister told me that this cousin used to come to their parties, and they often had barbecue nights. All these years, Stephanie had lied that this man was her cousin. Later, I understood that this man was indeed some sort of distant relative, but in this case, he was Stephanie's secret lover. Richard never spoke of Stephanie again after this incident. He no longer mourned her. He gave all her belongings, including the photos and the letter, to her mother, and only then could he move on with his life. It wasn't easy after that, but I'll tell you more about it in part 2. Don't forget to like and subscribe.